Good afternoon, everybody. If we could get going, it would be great. Give Dr. Quinn her due. My name is Yates Conwell. I'm very pleased to welcome you all and introduce this Grand Rounds. And I would, as just the business piece, remind people that we are hybrid here today, that we're going to encourage you to be thinking of your questions and putting them into the Q&A box as we go along here. Those of you who are remote, and at the end we'll reserve some time to have some interesting questions and interchange. There also will be availability of CPE credits through a link, which you get a QR code towards the end of this, those of you that are remote. And you click on that and you'll get to the evaluation form. We need your evaluations for ongoing quality improvement for our series and greatly appreciate your input there. That covers it pretty much, right? All right. So it's a real pleasure, as I said, to introduce Dr. Camille Quinn. Currently, Camille is a tenured associate professor of social work at the University of Michigan, and they're at the Center for Equitable Family and Community, but is an old friend of the University of Rochester. She hails from Alabama and then did her social work training in Chicago, where she received her doctorate at the University of Illinois, Chicago in social work. We first met Camille in 2012 when several of us here had an NIMH-funded virtual mentoring program for promising scholars who were underrepresented in the NIH portfolio. And we had really a fabulous group of 10 people from around the country. Camille was one of them. This was during her doctoral work. And she really stood out as a leader then among that group and somebody whom we were really glad to be able then to continue a relationship with over the years. She returned here in 2013 then for another suicide prevention research training experience, a summer research institute that we held at the time, and then completed her doctoral degree, following which she joined us as a postdoctoral fellow in our suicide prevention research training program. So she has trained us and vice versa for many years now, and we're so pleased to have her back. Following her postdoc, Camille went to join the faculty at the Ohio State University College of Social Work, and then was promoted to associate professor, tenured, went to the premier social work school in the United States at the University of Michigan, where she is now. You'll see that Camille's academic work is built on a long, solid foundation of clinical experience in working with youth, in particular those who are involved in the juvenile justice system, and touches on themes throughout of health equity, disparities, and in particular among youth who need help and for which we need to find better solutions both at the individual level and at the systems level. So with that focus, Camille has been very productive. She's got around 50 peer-reviewed publications and many more other reports and publications of different sorts. She's had and has grant funding from the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities, from NIMH, from the MacArthur Foundation, other civic and foundation organizations. So it's a real privilege to have her come back and speak here with us today. So join me in welcoming Dr. Camille Quinn.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Yates, for that kind introduction. It's always good to be back home. This is really where the deep dive of my work really commenced here in Rochester during my 2 years here as a postdoc in the Center for the Study of Prevention and Intervention for Suicide Research. I'm gonna just move through these slides. You heard all this stuff. I have no conflicts of interest to report. I do wanna do a very brief inclusive introduction for anyone who may have any visual impairments. I am about 5'3.5" in height. Yeah. My hair is shoulder length. I'm wearing clear glasses, and I have on a black jacket and a multi-print top, black pants. You can't see them behind this podium, but I am a Black African-American woman, cisgender, and as Jay said, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. My pronouns are queen, she, her, and hers. Yes, and I am a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a caregiver, a mentor, and a confidant. I share that because I want everyone to feel as if they're engaged and have some level of understanding of who is in the room with you. These are the objectives of my talk. They're very straightforward. I really want people to understand the factors that are associated with girls' pathways to offending, or what I prefer, law-breaking behavior, as well as to describe and highlight the role of parents, peers, and other factors in girls' lives who are involved with the youth punishment system. And I'll explain that term in a little bit. And then talk about the need for culturally tailored mental health interventions for this population. This is just an overview of my agenda. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about the population, talk a little bit about my research approach, and what I've termed as the Imara papers. I'll tell you all about them. And then talk a little bit about culturally tailoring intervention development research, implications, and some next steps. So in terms of background, I think it's important that we can deconstruct the pathways that occur for girls who engage in law-breaking behavior. The presumption, or the presumptive narrative, is that these are individual level choices that girls make on a daily basis, as if they occur in isolation, and I want to break that norm and say that they do not. They co-occur at the individual, the family, the peer, school, community, and systemic levels. So I want to share a little bit of terminology with you. I no longer use the terms juvenile offender or juvenile justice system as of 2020. I stopped using those terms. I moderated a talk about social justice to look at this issue of girls in the juvenile justice system, and I used the term juvenile. And the individual who's a run of show leader said to me, "Oh, Dr. Quinn, we don't use the term juvenile." And I said, "Oh, great. I won't either. Thank you." So at that point, I was actually doing a deep dive for my 4th year review while I was at Ohio State. And I did a little bit of research and found that there was empirical research to support the stigmatizing aspects of language with regard to adolescents who had been arrested in school, or it was known that they had been arrested. And then when they returned, they're referred to as either offenders, juvenile offenders. And so I decided I'm not going to use that language anymore. I don't want to use language that is going to stigmatize the population any further. So this was a very deliberate and intentional shift. I published this terminology in terms of the youth punishment system in several papers. So it also reflects that there are national cases. These are just 2, like Khalif Browder, who is from the Bronx in New York City, and Micaiah Bryant, who lived in Columbus, Ohio, who both died at the hands of legal intervention. The latter in particular called the police to help her and subsequently died in that scenario. So I believe that in many ways, the system is not just, and it serves to punish youth, especially youth of color. So I only use terms youth and the youth punishment system, or YPS, because I believe it's important in my station to do everything in my power to reduce the stigma and the bias and the stereotyping that's involved with regard to this population. So if you look at this graph, it shows the increase from 1980 to 2019, and these are all rates of arrests for Black girls, pardon me. This data is not disaggregated by race. However, the authors wanted to show what people are not aware of, which is that arrest rates have continued to increase for this population. Even though they may dip at some point, they continue to increase over time at about 32%. This particular graph shows the total decrease in arrest rates, which is, as of 2019, has been at its lowest in 4 decades, with the exception of girls, particularly Black girls, who remain overrepresented in this system. Girls are the fastest growing group in the youth punishment system, and they account for just over a third of all arrests. Again, Black girls are overrepresented in this system when you compare them to their racial and ethnic female counterparts. And Black girls below the age of 18 accounted for just under 40%, about 35% of all girls who are involved in the youth punishment system, but they're only 14% of the national population of American girls. So this is a significant disparity that we're looking at. So some other background points that you want to think about, because these are usually precursory behaviors or circumstances that affect or impact the population directly. Histories of childhood sexual abuse. About 40% of Black females report retrospectively that they experienced coercive sexual contact by age 18, which suggests an extremely high rate of trauma among girls of color. Associated with that are the mental health disparities that are also burdensome for this population, whether they've been diagnosed with a mental health disorder or not, or misdiagnosed with a mental health disorder. They often experience symptoms of depression as well as trauma. So how might one go about engaging in this work? How do you conduct this portfolio of research in this manner? I use both primary and secondary research methods. Primary data collection, I collected data here when I was a postdoc. I have a pending IRB to start collecting data for a City of Columbus funded pilot project. And will soon also, once I get the notice of award, be collecting data for my National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities, R21, for a non-randomized test of a proposed intervention. However, part of that is rooted in community-based participatory research. I am a community person. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, Illinois. Wherever I've tended to live, I try to immerse myself in that community, learn who the people are so they know who I am. I don't approach individuals to engage in research unless it's based on a relationship. And that's a very time-consuming process, but it is a necessary process, because if you're engaging in community work, you have to have the community in the space. They're the experts. They're the ones that are going to guide you in the process of deciding what is the research question that we're going to actually engage in, what is the work that we're going to do. So part of the need rests on this ability to build a community and academic partnership, and not in just layman terms or in words only, but one that reflects a egalitarian approach to how the work is going to be done. This could be a needs assessment. They may feel they need a needs assessment. How we go about collecting the data. Who is collecting the data? Are these individuals who, in some way or another, mirror the population who we are wanting to engage in the research with? Maybe it's an evaluation. Whatever it is, we're all responsible for this work. And that's the key to sustainability, because that's the number one priority in community-based participatory work, is that we're able to continue whatever we've developed as a result of the work together. And if in fact there needs to be a follow-up or boosters or whatever is required, we will do that as well. I'm a mixed methodologist. So although I was trained as a quantitative researcher, I also made it my business to become trained as a qualitative researcher. Was not very popular when I was a doctoral student, but I felt it was important to see what are invisible voices saying. What is the meaning that they make out of what they view or what they perceive or what they think? That is very important to the work. We know that quantitative data can tell us generalizable information about a large group of people based on this particular point or line of inquiry that we're interested in, but there's also the qualitative aspect that can tell us about the data and what it means. What do the words mean in response to the questions that we're asking? Both of these methods have strengths and weaknesses, but together, I believe they can engage in the most complementary research that you can conduct. So many might ask, because many have asked me, why focus on girls who are involved in the youth punishment system? And this is why. They are underserved and understudied. Truly understudied. So I have set out to engage in work that would actually build or help continue to build an empirical base of knowledge around not just risk factors that are associated with the circumstances of Black girls' lives, but also their strengths, their protective factors, their assets, the things in their lives that allow them to go on and continue to engage despite the challenges or the difficulties that they may face. The Armara study was conducted by my colleague and friend, Ralph J. DiClemente. He was the principal investigator of this NIH study. Armara is a Swahili term that means strong or resolute. He conducted a randomized controlled trial to look at a sexual risk reduction intervention with this indicated meaning, public health term, that they were detained at the time this data was collected. This sample of Black adolescent girls were in Atlanta, Georgia, in this detention center, all between the ages of 12 and 17. And because it was a secondary analysis of this data, thankfully, we didn't have to get any IRB approval. So these papers, very important, because you can't really build a case for a line of inquiry without the empirical evidence. So this first paper that we, a group of us co-authored together, focused on these ecologies of risk. We wanted to see, even though it says risk, we did look at protective factors as well. And we found by doing a latent class analysis that there were 4 classes of individuals. And the 2 that stood out the most were this typical class. So these are individuals who averaged the highest rates of individuals who were incarcerated. They also had the highest rates of neighborhood or peer risk. So meaning being in the community that they were in or engaging or interacting with certain individuals in their peer group put them at the greatest risk for said harms or traumatic experiences, etc. So that really made me think, okay, so how else might we think about this particular issue and how it impacts girls? Because if they're in the communities and they're experiencing risk, and then they have their individual risk factors, whatever they may be, I talked about mental health. The other point that we wanted to look at, well, what does this offense history look like at multiple time points? Well, the data set only allowed us to look at one. So one time point, baseline, and then a follow-up. And what we found is that a third of the sample of these, remember, these are African-American detained girls, a third of them were only in those facilities because of a status offense. You might be thinking, well, what is that, Dr. Quinn? Well, status offense really is a technical violation. It could be they were out after curfew. So in other words, this was not a violent offense. They didn't have a weapon. They didn't steal a valued item above $500. Probation violation at worst. And then of those, because they were detained with the status offense, they're more likely to be associating with peers who also engage in highly risky behavior. So that puts them in a position where it's much more likely that they're gonna recidivate. This is their peer group. These are people they may come to trust, come to know. So we said, well, let's keep digging at this, right? And we wanted to look at, well, what if we looked at depression with this intersection of violence? Interestingly enough, we noted that even though there was a correlation between depression, but if they experienced or reported perceived support and self-esteem, that actually buffered the depression. So that's a great thing, right? So if these young women, even if they reported symptoms of depression, if they reported also that they had some type of social support and they themselves had higher self-esteem, that could reduce some of the impact of the depressive symptoms that they experienced. And then we said, well, okay, we looked at depression. What about post-traumatic stress disorder? This was really interesting because what we found in this particular paper, if individuals in the sample reported that they had high self-esteem, high future orientation, meaning they're looking forward to the future, what they could do, they have hope, they had much lower rates of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, some people might think, oh, that makes sense. Well, what confused me was if they also reported high rates of parental support, they also reported high rates of PTSD. I saw you, like, oh, yeah, I did the same thing. I went back to my colleague and I said, hey, I think we need to rerun the data again. We reran the data. Let's look at the variables. We recoded them again. And so it was the same. So remember I talked about the community. So I went to one of my community partners who does work with Black youth, and I said, this is what I found. What do you think about this? And he said, well, did you ask the parents about their histories of trauma? No. Well, it could very well be, if you did, that they have histories of trauma themselves that could be normalized. And to them, it may not seem as if whatever that young lady or those young ladies who reported this are experiencing, that's not being acknowledged. The symptoms that they may be expressing may not be seen in the context of which to be best understood. So prior to this, I had no interest really in looking at parents or the roles of parents in my studies. I was really just interested in youth and young adults. This paper changed that trajectory. And this is when I decided that I have to include a space to engage parents and unpack some of these questions or what might be considered mixed evidence with regard to this population. We looked at a paper about perceived risk in terms of sexual health. Girls who reported partner communication had much higher perceptions of perceived risk. Seems logical. If I talk to my partner about my concerns or my thoughts about engaging in sexual activity, that might heighten my awareness of what I could be exposed to. So that seemed to be aligned. Well, this paper was just published, like literally last week. And what we looked at here was the rate of substance misuse among this population. And it's important to do that because typically literature says that this population tends to underreport, or they just don't report as higher rates of substance misuse as other groups, racial or ethnic groups in their age group. Well, what we found is that if younger girls reported much higher rates of substance misuse, and if they also engaged in sexual activity while they were engaging in alcohol or drug use, they were much more likely to have higher rates of drug use when we did a 3-month follow-up. So this really speaks to the context of what these correlates tell us. So to summarize some of these findings, clearly mental health and trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression are something that we need not shirk, especially when we're looking at the increased rates of suicide among Black youth and young adults, really across the life course. Regina King's son was in his early 30s when he died by suicide. So the other woman who was, I think, Miss USA, jumped out of a building and died by suicide, similarly in the same age group in the 30s. So if girls in this age group, 12 to 17, are reporting, even with the questionable potential misalignment of measures for depression, if they're reporting depression and trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder rates of this, it is very likely, without an appropriate or tailored intervention, they're much more likely to exacerbate. The noted finding about substance misuse with younger girls and sex under the influence of said drugs and alcohol is also a noteworthy finding that needs to be considered in thinking about an intervention or a way to intervene. Relationships with adults and peers. This is what I talked about, where some peers, maybe they are engaging, maybe they're pro-social, maybe not. Similarly with adults, being able to unpack this is critical, especially for parents, but also for peers, because this is the point in time when adolescents are individuating in many ways from their parents, from their families, even from their communities in some ways. So being able to think about what that means is critical. In some ways, being a Black girl is really hard. Sometimes it's hard being a Black woman, but what we noted from some of this work is it is hard for some of these young women, but the protective factors remain. Self-esteem, future orientation, these are evidence of ways that their own kind of strengths and assets can be leveraged. So interventions need to engage in that way so that young girls can say, yeah, I am powerful. Clearly they are saying that on some level because they do have high self-esteem despite these challenges and difficulties. So I shared this, it's a cover of a report. by Sean Jenwright, who is an African-American historian at the University of San Francisco. His primary work had really focused on trauma-informed care. Well, he's thus since shifted his focus and is really engaged in what I've been enthralled with, which is healing-centered engagement. And that is this holistic shift in how we view trauma, but not just trauma, but how we view people who we perceive to have experienced traumatizing circumstances. So what is the cause? And then what is the intervention? So it's moving beyond the person and saying, what's wrong with you? And instead saying, what happened? And even with Dr. Jenwright, this is his work, doing groups with Black and brown youth in Oakland. A young man in the group said to him, like kind of pushed back and said, you know, Dr. G, I'm not my trauma. And Dr. G was taken aback, and the young man could see it. So he wanted to explain, because he wasn't trying to disrespect him, but he said that that's what happened to me. That's not who I am. That's what happened to me. It's not who I am. So we have to be clear on what happened to people, to these girls, and not act as if that is who they are. So that means we need to understand their culture, their spirituality. I published another paper where we looked at spirituality and religiosity. And if young people in Chicago who identified as Black or African American, if they reported high levels of spirituality and religiosity, they were much less likely to engage in quote unquote risky sexual activity. So even though Pew data suggests that the numbers or the rates of Black adolescents who are engaging in spirituality is decreasing based on their parents' or their parents' rates, what we found is that some of these young people are engaging in different types of activities that support and promote their spiritual growth. They may engage in online services as opposed to just going to church, or they may have a group that they participate in at the local church. So this notion around collective healing, civic action are ways that we collectively can tap into their own agency, their efficacy. How do they see themselves engaging in the world beyond what has happened to them? And the most unique aspect, or I should say innovative aspect of this work, is really hinging on what we do. It looks like we're saying develop your story and share it with your clients, right? So you need to have clarity on your own story and why you're doing what you're doing before you engage with the population, whether you're engaging as a researcher, as a clinician, as a mentor, as a friend, relative, or whatever. Be clear about your story and what that can, in fact, add versus take away from this dimension. So these are some of the funded projects, all focused around intervention development. This particular study was funded by the Columbus City Council. It is a small pilot study, it's mixed methods, looking at measures of stress, pre and post intervention. It's a non-randomized trial, which means that no one is gonna be randomized to a control or an experimental group. It's a very small N, but the city is very supportive of this work because part of what I think is useful is being able to adapt this particular intervention. So the first phase of the study, we actually talked about it with these different entities. I was a member of the Governor's Council on Juvenile Justice in Ohio for 3 years. When I was a faculty member in the College of Social Work, worked directly with the City of Columbus City Councilwoman who's now retired, Priscilla Tyson, as well as the former lead juvenile court judge, Elizabeth Gill, who all supported this work. Their predecessors, people who came in after them, also support the work, which is, I'm very thankful of. I used intersectionality theory to frame this study. because I think it's important to think about girls in this intersectional way, not just about their gender, not just about their race, but how, based on societal structures, are they actually marginalized or promoted or supported based on their categories of identity and in the spaces upon which they intersect. Part of what we're doing is, in the first phase of the study, is conducting interviews, separate interviews with the girls and their self-nominated parent or caregiver to find out from them, what is it that you've had in terms of treatment? Have you been referred? Was this placed in your community? Was it useful? What would you recommend? What might be some alternatives to what you experienced? And then, because of good feedback from the NIH reviewers, we're actually going to just share the proposed intervention with them and ask them, what do you think about this? Does anything here stand out as a plus, as positive? And that is based on 6 one-hour sessions that will occur over 6 weeks. Again, this is a small sample. It's 5 dyads, so they're parent and caregiver and the adolescent, and we'll give them incentives at 3 different times during the actual intervention. At the end, we'll do respondent verification. At the end of every session, we'll do member checking to kind of ensure that what they told us is consistent with what we heard. This larger study, I'm finalizing the competing application and just-in-time documents that will be submitted Friday. It too is a mixed method study. We're also measuring stress, pre and post intervention, a non-randomized trial. The difference, also using intersectional theory, but what we're doing differently here is we're looking at a mechanism for cortisol. So we're gonna look at hair assays to assess stress, pre and post intervention. I have an outstanding team that's helping me with this project. 35 parent, caregiver, adolescent dyads, and they will, during the intervention, will get an incentive at each session, because part of the issue, of course, is wanting to demonstrate feasibility and acceptability. So hopefully this might defray some of the issues related to attrition. Some of the implications, I think, of this work: Black girls and young women who were exposed to violence and victimization as children are much more likely to experience violence as young women and adults. And this is not necessarily due to their own behavior. It may be their own circumstances. It could be where they live. It could be being in an impoverished community, a whole host of things that I won't enlist here. But what we also know from what I've shared with you today is that Black girls do possess a certain amount of resilience, strength, assets, and protective factors that point the way to how we can provide meaningful opportunities for their development and for their mental health equity. Symptom presentation and responsiveness to treatment varies based on cultural and social experiences. So we have to think creatively about how do we assess in the moment whether or not what we're doing is actually useful or not. Asking during or after, or simply just asking them directly, what is the best way for us to proceed? And then this idea of healing-centered engagement, which focuses on this collective action and transformation that I'm just so jazzed about. And then being able to intervene based on client strengths, because I think that's the leverage point. In research, particularly health equity research, we often talk about, well, where is the point of uptake? How do we get this upstream? Well, I think this is one way that we can try to promote this further. Identifying up front, what are the things they're already doing well? Where are the strengths? Where do they lie? And then how do you balance that with respect to the different levels of adversity they may be facing? In terms of next steps, I'm working with colleagues at Ohio State, here at University of Rochester, to resubmit a multi-site longitudinal mixed method study looking at how do we solve this issue or address this issue of Black youth suicide. in this particular study, we want to focus on assets using a developmental assets framework, which is from the positive youth development work. We hope that our resubmission in June will be favorable. We'll see. So I want to end with this visual, because this picture in the middle that says "say her name" is a moniker that we all should adhere to. Because many of these young women, I don't know these young women. They're not, have no relationship to them. They're what I thought would be beautiful pictures to include and to conclude my talk and leave with you the importance of not just who they are by face, but also the importance of who they are by name. These are just my acknowledgements, and I thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Quinn. Reminder, people, please, those of you who aren't in the room with us, put your questions, comments into the Q&A box, and we're open to questions from the audience. If folks have one, please. Yes, ma'am.
Research on your personal life and the information that you were able to attain to get all this research. How did that impact you based on your upbringing and who you are as a Black woman?
Could you repeat the question, maybe? Sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Correct me if I may misspeak, but I believe the question is, how has the research impacted me in terms of myself, my background, and how I grew up? So it's very personal to me. You know, I was a girl, and in many ways I still am, despite what you see, which I think is a good thing. But my work is in many ways because of how I was raised, because of my family. Like many of these young girls, I had moments where I made bad decisions, but I always had my family's support, no matter what. They never abandoned me. They may have been disappointed or, you know, punished me, which I appreciate because I now know limits, right? I know that, you know, there are consequences to actions. And so there was a point in my life where I may not have been as clear or understood why girls were engaging in the behaviors that they were. And then I got involved as a volunteer at the Cook County Temporary Juvenile Detention Center. And I started going there weekly and getting to know these young women, talking to them about their lives. And it was quickly evident to me the differences, many of which are even far more problematic than what I've shared today about the girls in this study. So in many ways, I'm humbled by this work because I have the privilege to do it.
Thank you. Other questions we got here?
Thank you so much. This obviously brings up just so many questions, so I'll try to be concise and articulate. I'm thinking a lot about some of the upcoming intervention studies that you mentioned and the idea of focusing specifically on girls already involved in the system. And just thinking about what the goals are in terms of potential either future work in terms of prevention interventions, and also downward extensions for younger aged Black girls. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts about that. I know that's likely multiple steps ahead, but just curious about that.
Thank you for the question. So there's always this balance between prevention and intervention. I see it as a both and, right? I would love to be able to intervene, say, in the first 4,500 days of a child's life. I mean, that's a straight public health lens, right? But I also recognize that for many of the reasons that I share with you today, there are individuals who may not ever be in that group to be acknowledged or identified in ways that they can be supported for prevention. So the need to intervene persists. And I see intervention as research itself. That was one of the reasons why I've been so driven to focus on girls particularly, because I think that the intervention in and of itself could be a game changer for them. Being able to engage in sessions where they're able to kind of figure out ways that they can better self-regulate, or even know what that means. Not to presume they don't, because they do. I mean, that's the other key piece, is most people know how to heal. They heal themselves all the time. The difference is when their capacity or capital for healing is extinguished or it's gone, then what do? That's when external interventions are needed. So I think, and my hope is that in conducting these two studies, I will learn more with regard to both prevention and intervention. Clearly, there's going to be learnings with regard to intervention, but also for prevention. And I think having the addition of parents and caregivers who I can also speak to, where I would suspect they may or may not possibly have their own histories of circumstances that may have influenced their childhood, their parenting, their just overall choices in life. And being able to see, well, how might that continue to potentially affect this child, but then also could this potentially be a vehicle for healing for them, for their relationship? So I do think that maybe future work might include younger ages of girls. I am going to be launching a Qualtrics study where I'll collect data through Qualtrics panels from some of these individuals that they partner with. And part of that goal is to look at girls younger, to engage them, not in the same types of questions, but more around their overall experiences, and see what those look like, whether it's in school or in their communities or at home.
Thanks. There are several questions coming in here. So I'll choose from them, try to get through them. First is, Dr. Quinn, how did your extended family affect your life?
Probably in the best way possible. I mean, I really felt like I had an idyllic childhood. I didn't realize, probably until I was 11, that I felt a sense of loss because I did not grow up with my biological father. But my mother is a gem of a person. She's never uttered a negative word about my dad, who is now deceased. But I think that her and her parents' overall focus was that my brother and I were safe and happy and fed. So, and we sometimes even had a choice in what the feeding was like. Not too much, but sometimes. But I think those are things that influence a child's perception of safety and stability. And so I never questioned any of those things. So I think the extended family, and even beyond them, was primarily my grandmother's family, her siblings. My mom's the only child, so all of my aunts and uncles are her aunts and uncles. So all of those family members really rallied around and demonstrated this collective familialism that Sean Jen Wright talks about. And so that's something that I've tended to demonstrate throughout my adult life. Like when I said that I you mentioned being back home. It is like being back home because many people in this room, I feel like our family. So that was something that experience provided me with, the ability to attach to people in meaningful and different and unique ways.
Very interesting. And as you so articulately explained, we need to understand so many dimensions of the individuals who are participating in our research. It's a complicated thing. Maybe we also need, as you're demonstrating for us here, to understand the researcher to really appreciate the research. So thank you for sharing aspects of your past history yourself in that regard. One of the questions concerns this intersectionality theory and how we actually use that. If you could expand a little bit more on what it is and how it then gets played out. We're in the home of the biopsychosocial model, and we give all sorts of credence to the idea that we can't understand an individual by their biology or absent understanding of their relationships, their family, and the social context as well. But intersectionality theory challenges that even further, I think.
It does.
Help us with that.
Sure, I'll do my best. I think Kimberly Crenshaw is the one who coined this theory. It had been in existence prior. The Shawnee tribe had thought about it, put it together, but she's the one that really coined it, and it has garnered a lot of notoriety and has become established as a theory. So this notion of intersectionality suggests that when you look at individuals in terms of their categories of identity, for some of us, there are multiple marginalizing cumulative effects that are associated with their very existence as a Black person, as a person with a disability, as a person who may identify on a non-binary or non-gender conforming continuum. And so the culmination of those identities in a system or structural society that doesn't value those identities, in effect, results in some level of potential suffering. Because if there are aspects of who you are as a person that are ignored or are invisible to people, that in effect, the very fact that that exists could potentially be marginalizing for individuals who share those multiple identities. And so that, in addition to the experiences of, say, racism, violence exposure, trauma, et cetera, can just further heighten symptoms they may experience, experiences that they may not be aware that they're experiencing, that they themselves recognize, they may not know. So I think on the slide I said that for Black girls and young women who have histories of violence exposure and trauma, they're much more likely to be traumatized in the future, because the presumption in their mind is they may not be connected in a conscious way to that experience. It's there, but they may not be connected to it in that way. And so that in and of itself puts them in a position where they may, in fact, be marginalized just because of where they are or where they go, where they travel or what they do. And so something that could be benign for one person could be malignant for someone else.
Very helpful, thanks. Just one more question here from Dr. Sheftal. She's not able to be in the room, but she's here with us today. And she asks if you could change one thing to help Black girls who have been involved with the system, what would that one thing be?
That's a wonderful question because it speaks to hope. I would change their existing view of themselves in a way that continues to bolster their self-esteem. and their future orientation. Because the fact that it exists, despite the challenges, the difficulties that they experience, just speaks to Aymara, that Swahili term, being resolute, being strong, but also recognizing that if they are in a space where they feel exposed or vulnerable, that they have the support they need to be present in those spaces without harm.
I love it. Other than that, there are a number of comments here thanking you for a wonderful presentation. I know we all do the same. We'll stop now. Thank you, Dr. Quinn.
Thank you all.